You're listening to The Reality Check, episode 405, recorded June 7th, 2016.
This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, your weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I'm your host, Darren McKee, and with me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Bernoids?
Cristina Roach.
Hello.
And producer Pat.
Hi, everyone.
We have a great show for you today. I'm going to talk to you about Hillary versus Bernie in the Democratic primary, and Adam is going to explore the controversy about changing the Canadian national anthem. But first, Cristina is going to look into whether the University of Alberta almost put on a spoon-bending workshop. Cristina, is this true?
Well, here's a story fresh off the presses for you guys. After a ton of backlash, the University of Alberta has cancelled a workshop slotted for later this month, where doctors were apparently going to learn how to bend spoons with only their minds. Ooh. You heard that right. We got a few listeners writing in about this. Thanks to Alex Murdoch and Paul Bueller for excellent work in the field and being the first checkers to flag it on TRC's Facebook page. By definition, spoon bending is the alleged deformation of metal cutlery without the use of physical force. So essentially the illusion is that you're using the power of your mind to bend a spoon. It's a common trick used by magicians over the years who create the illusion using various methods.
I guess it's less impressive if it's plastic and they bend it just by heating it a bit.
Yeah, or chocolate.
Now, there's a well-documented history of spoon bending, and I linked to the Wikipedia entry in the show notes because it gives a really great synopsis of the topic. Spoiler alert, James Randi handily debunked this many years ago, calling out self-professed paranormalist Uri Geller, who rose to fame in the 70s doing the TV circuit bending spoons and claiming he could influence physical objects with his mind. Many of you may know that Randi has famously offered, Darren?
$1 million.
Thank you. To any person who can demonstrate paranormal abilities such as spoon bending. No surprise, to this panel anyway, that no one has been able to claim that prize to this day. I highly recommend checking out a video I linked to where James Randi talks about exposing Uri Geller. It has some really awesome footage of Geller being discredited live on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, if you've never seen that.
Oh, awesome.
So Tim Caulfield, professor of health law and science policy at U of A, tweeted a poster he saw on campus advertising a workshop called Spoon Bending and the Power of the Mind. I have to say Caulfield is becoming one of my favorite Canadians who champions critical thinking. Some of you may recognize his name from when I took on Gwyneth Paltrow's claims about vaginal steaming, because he put out a book last year called Is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything? When Celebrity Culture and Science Clash. Caulfield says when he first saw the poster, he actually thought it was a magic show. But the workshop was in fact arranged by the university's Complementary and Alternative Research and Education Program, or CARE for short. Just to give you guys a bit of background, the university founded an integrative health institute in 2014 to study the relationship between conventional medicine and so-called complementary and alternative treatments. This workshop was to be led by Edmonton energy healer, that's in quotes, Anastasia Cutt, who touts Reiki as one of her specialties and explains energy healing on her website as, quote, removing issues and stress from your energetic field to bring it into balance and its original state of good health. Caulfield tweeted the poster, which boasted that by the end of the workshop, 75% of the doctors attending would be able to bend spoons only using their minds. As Caulfield said in a CBC interview, there is absolutely no physical way you can bend a spoon with your mind. That's why it's so frustrating that it's being presented in this legitimate way at a science-based institution. Now, thankfully, Caulfield's tweet went viral in a good way, and the university released a statement soon after saying the workshop had been withdrawn by the presenters, citing the event was about energy therapies in general and acknowledging the lack of evidence about their effectiveness.
Ooh.
However, this story is really just the tip of the iceberg. This program's not exclusive to the University of Alberta. It's a growing movement across North America where you're finding integrative institutes popping up at various universities.
I think this was a controversy in Toronto like several years ago, right?
I don't remember that story.
At the University of Toronto, I think.
Oh, really? That wouldn't surprise me. As Caulfield points out, the big issue is that programs like CARE lend legitimacy to what he calls quackademics, And instead of fostering conversations about critical thinking, they really just validate pseudoscience. Now, the Integrative Health Institute has more than 100 associated researchers and scholars, including an elite scientific advisory panel. But just yesterday, the Institute's most distinguished scientific advisor, virologist Dr. Lorne Tyrrell, resigned. Here's what he told the Edmonton Journal. I originally agreed to serve on the Science Advisory Board thinking there would be a critical evaluation of many of the forms of alternative medicine that are available to the public. Unfortunately, rather than critical evaluation, the IHI seemed to give credibility to forms of alternative medicine that I did not agree with. I have resigned, as this has not been an institute of critical scientific evaluation. Ooh, talk about feeling the burn. So what do you guys think? I was saying to Pat that I'm feeling encouraged because it seems now whenever there's some woo that gets out there, people on Twitter especially or in social media start to put the kibosh on it right away. But you kind of disagreed with me, Pat. You didn't think it was necessarily a movement in that direction.
I don't think so at all. I don't think, like, if you're asking whether or not it's getting better, which
Yes.
you seem to be indicating, no, the idea that they're now integrating these sort of CAM things with legitimate medicine, it's like a growing thing as near as I can
Right.
see. So I know that it happened at the U of T, and then there's this. Like, is
That's
it getting
true.
better? I don't think so.
What do you guys think?
I guess I have kind of mixed feelings. I mean, it's a university, it's a place of learning, it's a place of sort of open discussion, so you kind of want people to feel free to sort of pursue their interests and bring up things. But, you also need to challenge things that are ridiculous. Is there is there an atheist group or a critical thinking group at this school that could just have a field day with these guys, or what's going on? I think it's kind of sad that these kind of institutions exist, but what's the kind of solution to it that's not just like suppressing people's ability to say it and not really actually tackling the belief at all, right?
Yeah, and I'd say, I guess it depends exactly what you might be looking at. So with one-offs like this, where this thing is happening, like this potential spoon-bending workshop, you could say it's really bad that it was happening at all. Like, who thought that up? And that seemed like it was a good idea.
Right.
And they thought it was a good idea in the first place.
Yeah.
But then you could say, well, there's enough of a public outcry or concern that they stopped doing it. Same thing with Jenna McCarthy speaking in Ottawa at that medical conference.
Yeah.
But to Pat's point, aside from like these more public situations, it could be underlying all this is this further integration of quote-unquote integrative medicine, which is a lot of unverified practices, which is deeply concerning. So I guess it'd be nice if we all had some data, but it does seem like naturopathy is on the rise and similar things.
Yeah, that's a good point. I thought Dr. Tyrrell put it really well when he resigned on that quote. He pretty much summed it up.
I thought we were going to examine this, and in fact, we're just kind of taking it at face value.
Right.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Thanks, Cristina. From the absurdity of spoon bending to the absurdity of the Democratic primary race. I'm going to talk to you a bit about Hillary and Bernie, or maybe those who might be feeling burned on either side of the issue. Basically, given the swirling vortex of attention-sucking that is the U.S. presidential race, I couldn't help but do another segment on the topic, following my segment on whether Trump is a good businessman a few weeks ago. Hint, he isn't. This time, I want to explore the Democratic primary race. Why would I do this, given that the AP and then CNN and many others have declared Hillary the presumptive nominee, and other papers like The Guardian are already asking Bernie to step down?
Wow.
Yeah, as we said at the beginning of the show, we're recording this on Tuesday the 7th, and you might be listening to it on June 10th or sometime after that, so it's hard to know what might have happened in the intervening days between our recording and when you hear it. But I still think there is something very important for skeptics to observe and analyze, and that is the abundance of cognitive biases in action, as well as narratives being formed about legitimacy, which themselves may lack legitimacy. It is no wonder that scientists like to test confirmation bias by asking people before an election and after different questions about fairness of process and their feelings about opponents because the events are so polarizing. I'm going to focus on the Hillary and Bernie contest, and mainly on Bernie supporters, because there are various things to explore, and admittedly, it's one of the most annoying parts of my Facebook feed. I often see stories about Hillary doing something terrible, or Bernie leading in the polls, but when I click through, it turns out Hillary didn't really do or say the thing, or that Bernie isn't actually leading any poll relevant to that current primary. They also say that Hillary doesn't have the votes, or the real votes, to win. But is that really the case?
It's the superdelegates.
I'll look into that
That's what I
soon.
hear.
So note, Please don't take my segment as an endorsement of Hillary Clinton, just the expectation that I think she'll win, as we all predicted on the show at the beginning of the year. By the end of Tuesday, many hundreds of delegates will have been allocated, including California, and that will mean Hillary is likely ever closer to being the de facto nominee. Neither of them can really clinch it. Likely. Bernie definitely can't. It's possible Hillary could sweep everything in the next day and do so, but that also seems unlikely. Which means it should probably go to a convention, technically, in July on the 25th. Just for some context. Sketchy articles and posts aside, let's look at the broad notion of what is legitimate. We don't have time to discuss the entire two-party system that's developed in the United States, filled with deferential power, backroom deals, entrenched interests, and even dirty tricks. But private parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, provide options for people to vote. But anyone could actually vote differently, assuming there isn't much voter fraud, and although there's some, I don't believe there's a lot. What I'm trying to say is Ralph Nader ran, and he did get votes, not that many. And Ross Perot did succeed, mainly because he's a billionaire, but people still could actually vote for whomever they want, as long as they're on the ticket. This is what I mean. It is broadly democratic in some sense. Additionally, Bernie was an independent for 36 years before becoming a Democrat in 2015.
Oh, wow.
Obviously planning to run on the Democratic ticket. Is this wrong? No, it's part of what is allowed. Although I could see others being annoyed. It's like you were an independent for so long and now you're trying to take away the Democratic race? But you're still allowed. As for the peculiar nature of the primary race, where there are many differences from state to state, just to describe that, using a quotation from Mother Jones, depending on the state, Democrats hold open primaries and caucuses, open to any voter, closed contests, open only to registered Democrats, or something in between, as in California, where Democrats and independents, but not Republicans, can vote in the Democratic primary.
So if you're a registered Republican, you're not allowed to vote. Otherwise you're fine? Is that the idea?
In California,
yes.
But you could in some of the other ones. On June 7th, in addition to California, independent voters can partake in Democratic primaries in Montana, South Dakota, and North Dakota's caucuses. New Jersey's primary is closed, but independents can change their registration at the polls. The only state today that will limit its voting to previously registered Democrats is New Mexico.
That seems all kind of silly to me.
Yeah. Over here in Canada, this whole thing seems pretty absurd, but it's not obvious which of these is fairer compared to others. Bernie supporters also say he does better in caucuses and the primaries are less fair. But caucuses have lower turnout, as they often take longer, and thus there are fewer people supporting a winning candidate. Now, a quick note on what the difference between a caucus and a primary is from Diffin.com. Unlike a primary, where residents simply cast their ballots, a caucus is a local gathering where voters openly decide which candidate to support. Basically, you gather in a room and you vote, and it takes much longer versus putting in a secret ballot.
Okay.
Now, 538.com did some interesting analysis, and they looked at what would happen if all caucuses were like primaries. Because primaries have higher turnout, so that seems a bit more legitimate, at least one way of looking at it. And Clinton would be ahead by an even larger margin than she currently is.
Oh.
So if we're going with the process, which is the primary, which has a higher voter turnout at the moment, Clinton would be even further ahead. Now, during this race, Bernie has done best in states that hold open primaries. This makes some sense, as he was an independent for so long, and those Americans who dislike the Democrats and Republicans could still vote for him in these open primaries. Alternatively, he hasn't done as well in closed systems, where registered Democrats seem to like voting for the lifelong Democrat. This doesn't really seem surprising or illegitimate. Yeah. As well, if some voters are really concerned, they could just register as Democrats ahead of the time of the vote and then vote that way.
Yeah.
538.com did more analyses and looked at what would happen if every state had held an open primary, and Clinton would still be ahead, although her lead would have dropped from 12 percentage points to 8 percentage points. Now, this was done about 2 weeks ago, by the way. I'm not giving you a lot of numbers because they've already shifted, and they shift all the time. Mm-hmm. So this excellent piece on 538.com by N10 and Silver crunched numbers various ways and looked at each candidate's ideal scenario. Now, for Clinton, this would have been all closed primaries, and she would actually beat Sanders by 19%. Mm-hmm. For Bernie, it would be all open caucuses, so independents can vote, and he'd actually win by 22%, although with fewer delegates. Mm-hmm. Now, who's to say one is more fair than the other, and also the entire country and all the states are not going to shift to one of these versus the other. It's currently a mix, and it's probably going to stay that way. Uh-huh. I thought their conclusion provided a useful perspective. They said when everything is put together, Sanders, and thus Bernie supporters, don't have much to complain about. And here's a quote. If the Democratic nomination were open to as many Democrats as possible, through closed primaries, Clinton would be dominating Sanders. And if the nomination were open to as many voters as possible, through open primaries, she'd still be winning. So only if it was open to people who wouldn't maybe necessarily vote Democrat, or in another way that forces people into the caucus system, would she end up losing. Finally, Bernie supporters keep complaining about how superdelegates are going to give Hillary the win, going against the will of the people.
Yeah.
This is not true in a general sense. Now, AP did just call Hillary the presumptive nominee because they did a survey of superdelegates, and they thought they reached a sufficient number combined with Hillary's current pledge delegates, such that she now has a number to cinch the nomination. But those superdelegates can't actually pledge their vote until the convention on the 25th. So Hillary can't technically yet be the nominee. If Sanders maybe dropped out, then it would really still be presumptive. But they almost say presumptive until there's like the official paperwork to go through.
So if all those superdelegates all of a sudden started feeling the burn...
Exactly. It could switch.
Scales.
Right, it could. But Sanders is losing the popular vote and the current pledged delegate count.
Yeah.
And these superdelegates are currently aligned with this outcome. It would actually be less legitimate if they suddenly voted for Bernie.
Yeah, because I saw all these graphs that were showing, like, here's where the people say, and here's the big, huge difference with the superdelegates, but I guess if Hillary's winning both, then...
Right, so Hillary has been ahead in pledged delegate count almost since the beginning.
Yeah.
Now, the superdelegate issue was something raising the ire of Bernie supporters because many of the superdelegates said they would vote for Hillary, whatever it was, 8 or 10 months ago, when Bernie wasn't even in the race. So it seems like it wasn't fair to include him.
Sure.
Then again, they could have liked her policies. He was an independent, and now that he's moving along, sure, he's done very well, more so than most people expected, but he is still not winning either the popular vote or the pledged delegate vote. So it just seems very odd to me. This is not surprising, given that we know how the world works and how people think, but I have these discussions with people like, so what would happen if he loses? And try to get them into the cognitive perspective taking, like, well, she's currently ahead by all these metrics. Doesn't that mean it's more legitimate in a democratic sense? Now, they can always say that she's rigged the system, or the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, has done something nefarious, or Hillary's getting more media coverage, etc., etc.
Yeah, I see a lot.
I feel like the whole thing is a bit absurd as opposed to what's fair and what's not. Like, Donald Trump, is that fair? Is it not? Like, the whole thing is absurd in the sense that he himself... Donald Trump should have done himself huge disservices and thus not been as popular, but he is, and he's getting more media coverage.
Well, it's weird, because, I mean, Donald Trump is kind of doing what people wish Bernie Sanders was doing. The party doesn't really respect him, but he's getting the vote of the people, and that's enough, right?
Right, and I wasn't going to go too much into Trump, but it's interesting because these political parties, Democrats and Republicans, they are brands. And it's possible Trump will do enough damage that this will hurt the Republican brand for years if he doesn't win. Anyway, that was just my little pseudo-rant with some metrics about why I would hope that other people are just a bit more evidence-based and a bit less emotionally galvanized, but such is the nature of politics.
But I mean, when you see enough of these articles, it's hard to tease out, what's legitimate and from what isn't. And I guess that's what's confusing. When I see these, I see all these headlines, and I'm like, is there fraud going on? What's going on? I'm not interested enough to really delve into it like you have.
Right. Every single time I've clicked, I'm like, okay, she didn't actually say that, or Bernie didn't really do that, or okay, the poll you said existed wasn't relevant, as I said. So
that was the Onion.
Watching this U.S. election can make some of us think, oh, Canada, and want to sing our national anthem. But maybe it's going to change. Should it? Could it? Adam?
We shall see. O Canada is Canada's national anthem. This means that that's the song that gets played when there's a Canadian team at an NHL hockey game. Well, in 1992, Canadian hockey goaltender Manon Rhéaume played NHL hockey, so it seems only fair that women also be represented in our national anthem. The story, which has made headlines recently, relates to Bill C-210. This bill, started by Liberal MP Maurille Bélanger, seeks to modify the lyrics of O Canada to be more gender inclusive. More specifically, changing a lyric in All Thy Sons Command to In All of Us Command. I'm not sure either makes a ton of sense to me, but I've never been able to make much sense of our national anthem. Maybe.
Since we're a bilingual country, formally, officially, is the French national anthem any different?
The lyrics don't match up in any way. The French version was first. I'll get into that later. But there is no gender-specific language that I recall from the French version of the national anthem.
Isn't all French language gender-specific?
Ooh, nice.
C'est vrai, Pat, c'est vrai.
Relating to humans, I don't believe there is any gender-specific references there. Maurice Bélanger has fatal ALS, which surely has something to do with the bill's current success. A vast majority of members of Parliament voted to update the lyrics on June 1st, though now that needs to head over to the Heritage Committee for further consideration. Our last government voted against the bill in 2015, so it should be said that not everyone is on board with this proposed change. Ultimately, this is not a position one can come to purely based on logic. Preferring to keep something for its historic value versus changing and updating it is going to be sort of a preference issue with most people. But we can use critical thinking to inform ourselves about the issue and potentially weigh in on the legitimacy of concerns that others have brought up. Conservative MPs last year thought such a change could cause a slippery slope, because when you don't have a good argument, the slippery slope is a great place to turn. The National Post's Andrew Coyne has an op-ed piece claiming that we don't need to change it because when we say all thy sons, we mean all of us. Which seems like nonsense.
Again, and whether that's nonsense or whether it's plausible will just depend on how you see it. Because people now accept guys as almost always now meaning guys and girls.
True, I catch myself saying that, but I also try not to because I'm maybe not being as inclusive as I...
Yeah, but there's women who greet a group of women as, hey guys.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously I can't get into someone's brain and decide what they really mean when they say something, but I don't know how sons becomes us. I don't know how that happens. Some people just want the lyrics to stay the way they are, which is a legitimate point of view, but we have to ask ourselves, how long have the lyrics actually been that way? O Canada dates back to 1880, when the governor of Quebec, Théodore Robitaille, commissioned it for a Saint Jean-Baptiste Day ceremony. This may seem odd, having our national anthem at a Saint Jean-Baptiste Day ceremony, since it is celebrated as Quebec's national holiday, but that is actually a more recent change to the way the day is celebrated. It's like we live in a constantly evolving and changing world where people adapt to change and things change.
You shut your progressive face.
The original O Canada was in French, and this is the version I would hear before every day going to school in the morning. I was recently at a banquet celebrating French in Ontario where they played the national anthem. This surprised my girlfriend and her family, as the national anthem did not play at her school growing up in Quebec. I think that may be common in other places in Quebec as well. So question to the panel, you guys are all from Ontario. Did you guys play the O Canada at your school in the morning when you guys were growing up?
Yes, they played it every morning, and part of it was in French.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Not at every grade, but I think into high school.
Mm-hmm.
I went to school in Quebec until grade 6, so
okay.
I don't think that totally counts for me. But
so they didn't play O Canada at your school in Quebec?
I think they did, but I honestly don't remember. I'm pretty sure they did. I mean, that was quite a few years ago. Do you remember that, Pat, for you?
For me, they did it every single morning.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we did it every single morning.
Okay. So it probably varies school by school. The first English version of O Canada wasn't written until some 26 years later in 1906. But that's not even the version we hear today. That was a more literal translation. A less literal but more popular version was written by Robert Stanley Weir in 1908. This original version didn't actually have the controversial line in All Thy Sons command. This was added in 1914 to replace the original Thou Dost in Us command. Also, this version did not contain the religious reference, God keep our land glorious and free. That said, there are other verses that are not often sung, and the original Robert Stanley Weir version did contain some religious lines, such as, Ruler supreme, who hearest humble prayer, hold our dominion within thy loving care. Help us to find, O God, in thee a lasting rich reward. So there was no attempt to be secular. That line wasn't there.
Sounds like a great song for 2016.
Yeah. So to me, while they're changing the anthem, I would have liked to have them consider removing the religious references. But all considered, that may be a tougher sell for most of Canada that's not Adam Gardner. Also notable, the national anthem was not always our national anthem. God Save the Queen and the Maple Leaf Forever were both contenders for national anthem when our country was founded in 1867. O Canada became popularly known as the anthem when it was played at the dedication of the National War Memorial here in Ottawa on May 21st, 1939. It was still used only somewhat consistently. For example, Toronto still used God Save the Queen. In 1967, it was decided that this would be Canada's national anthem, though this was not official until 1980 with the National Anthem Act. In 1967, a parliamentary committee studied the anthem and found that 45 different versions were being sung. And this was the point when God Keep Our Land Glorious and Free was added. Not that old. I think they could get rid of it. So if it's really about not changing things, then one can easily look at this instead as changing a line which has already been changed another time. I don't see anyone suggesting we go back to an earlier version of the anthem, so we are pretty much accepting that things like this can change and evolve over time, adapt to new situations. At this point, it seems likely that our national anthem will be updated to reflect a more inclusive Canada. If you don't like this, you are entitled to be upset about it. Just be sure that your reasons for feeling that way are legitimate. If it's a matter of tradition, we're just changing something that's been changed before. If it's a matter of thinking things were really great in the 80s and that we want to go back to that, well, I hope you don't just feel that way because you just watched the new Ninja Turtles movie.
Cowabunga, dude. Thank you for joining us once again. Oh, and just before we go, if you happen to be listening and you feel your vote in the Democratic primary race didn't really matter, you can do something that does matter and vote for us in the Podcast Awards. PodcastAwards.com. You have until Sunday night. Scroll down to the right to the Science Medicine category, click on the reality check, enter some info, and then verify your vote. We'd love to have your support. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, Burnoids.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
Hi, everyone. Producer Pat. As usual, I get the last word. The TRC crew has not taken a week off in a very long time, and so we decided that we will take a break next week. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
The Reality Check is an independently Canadian-produced podcast. For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes. I'm going to take a knee here. I'm going to do a little Tim Tebow prayer.
As we saw, you got to be a big boy. You got to dig deep at him. It's a cute outtake.
All right.
Well, you could stick it at the end or stick it in the outtakes or just cut it.
Thanks.
I'll tell you where to stick it.